Hey everyone! Before we open today's file, please make sure to follow us on Instagram at d.s.radio, where you can find all the images that go along with today's case. You can drop us an email at contact.dsradio@gmail.com. You can find all of our socials in the Linktree bio on our Instagram profile, including links to merch. If you're feeling especially generous, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/dystopian simulation radio, where you can get access to our exclusive Instagram page and make suggestions for upcoming episode topics that you would like us to cover. Speaking of Patreon, thanks to our Patreons, Riff Cult, Cropley Crab, Cash Broadus, Raspberry Jr., Jason R. Nelson, Creepy Paper, Jamie Sook, Michael Laughlin, Lindsay Keller, Mike Wright, Greer Weaver, Kelsey Carruthers, Linz Gibbon, Drake Holvig, Only Child, Michael M, Wesley Akers, Riaz K, Emily Medeiros, Pip, Heather Wynn, Graves, Devon Sweatshirt, The Ordained Sinister Minister, and Philip Hoffman. Hi everyone, and welcome to Dystopian Simulation Radio. I'm your host, Linz.
And I'm your other host, Chris.
So Chris, how was your Christmas? Your favourite time of the year?
It was very, very festive. Had a wonderful time. My son got all kinds of amazing things, including a rather large present from myself, which was very, very lovely of you. It was great. It was great. We had a wonderful time, and a bit sad it's over, but, you know, new year, same old me.
Same old mental illness. But yeah, now you can start your countdown again, Chris, which, you can put those sweaters, the Christmas sweaters. I noticed you have multiple ones now. They're multiplying a lot, and you even have family ones, which is
I do.
Amazing and horrifying.
There's 361 days until the next Christmas.
You know what you could do? You could collect at least 31 of them and then start wearing them like on the 1st of December every year.
I know somebody who actually does that.
You know what? I'm not even freaking surprised that you know somebody. Is it you?
It's not me. It's not me for once. No, I mean, unfortunately, I just don't have the room for 31 Christmas jumpers. But one day...
It's something to look forward to when you're like looking for your next house, like extra closet space.
Well, here's a cheapskate tip for everybody. If you go out to the charity shops now, you can pick up Christmas jumpers for next to nothing. And we also had New Year as well, so Happy New Year. This is now 2023. And this is the 3rd year that we have been in operation, although, no, is it?
2nd. It can't be the 3rd.
We started in 2021.
Mm-hmm. Quite late as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, exactly. We just squeaked it in there. So technically it's the 3rd year we've existed in.
Woo-hoo!
But we're only a year and a bit old.
Yeah, true. I don't think people heard of us in the first 6 months that we existed.
I don't think people have heard of us now.
Yeah, well, significantly more than what we had back then. But if you were around for the first episodes, amazing. And please send us a DM telling us how you found us. If you found us at the beginning of the podcast, because I'm really curious to know.
Yeah, we're really interested to find out how people find out of us. We asked on Instagram for a lot of you to share us as a Christmas gift, and loads of you did. We've seen a surge in listeners and followers, so thank you so much, and please continue to share the good word.
Yeah, I would say the good word, even though I'm looking quite demonic at the minute. You guys won't see this, but we're on Instagram. We're trying a new recording technique because we're not in the same place. We're on Instagram video chat, and we also have our mics recording. So, Chris, shall we get on with the episode? But first, would you like to share the socials where our listeners can find all the visuals that go along with this episode?
Of course. So the main place, the main hub that you need to go to is our Instagram page, which you can search for on Instagram at d.s.radio. And up at the top there, we've got a link tree that's got a link to all of our socials and everything else. The most important one that you need to know about is our Patreon, which we are endeavoring to ramp up in 2023. So if you want to join us over on Patreon, you can join the party pal over there and at patreon.com/dystopian simulation radio. All of the images for today's show will be on the Instagram, so make sure you go over there and check it out. You made it this far.
But Chris, today I have an episode about your favourite place in the world, Japan.
Oh, and tell me more.
I'm not sure you want to know, but we're going to talk about it. So I want to start off this episode with a question for you, Chris. Have you ever, you don't have to get too personal, but have you ever been in a relationship where you found yourself changing for another person?
I don't think so. I don't think I've ever changed dramatically. I think I've been in relationships where people have helped me to better certain things about myself, but I haven't changed my whole personality because of a relationship.
That's actually a lovely answer. I did not expect you to come out with that. That's beautiful. Well, Chris, adapting in a relationship or a new situation may be common, but what if you found yourself changed beyond recognition, doing things so unspeakable that you no longer recognized yourself?
Oh. I mean, I think, I guess if I didn't recognize myself anymore, I would have gone pretty extreme. This isn't about a Japanese man making me cut off my testicles and then serve them to others in some kind of Mao Sugiyama situation.
Yes, we have covered that. If you want to know what Chris is talking about, look for cannibal cuisine, Mao Sugiyama. But no, Chris, I do often take DSR to Japan for strange cases and reasons. But unfortunately, today is no exception. We're going back there and we're going to a bit more dark than our previous published visits anyway. You and I both know we have a case that we didn't publish because it was so depressingly grim, actually made us feel sad. But anyway,
yes.
Chris, today we are taking a trip to Japan to look at one of the most shocking true crime tales in the country's history, to see just how far people can be pushed beyond the moral line through manipulation, abuse, and the sheer misfortune of crossing paths with the wrong, very wrong person. Futoshi Matsunaga was born on the 28th of April 1961 in Fukuoka, Japan. He was the eldest child and his parents ran a tatami store. So Chris, as an expert on all things Japanese, what is a tatami?
Tatami are the, for want of a better word, straw mats that you find stereotypically in Japanese homes. They come in a standard block size.
As a child, Futoshi was a good student who got good grades, and he was very sociable. Unlike his classmates, who were generally shy and introverted, Futoshi was loud and excitable, and this often got him into trouble with his teachers, who would have to scold him throughout the day for his backchat and the disruption of lessons. Nevertheless, he was respected by his peers, and was often class leader, as well as being on the school council. He also liked to organise his fellow students. For example, one time he organised a yoga group for the male students. So let's take a look at Futoshi here, Chris. If you could describe to the listeners what you see. So the first picture is his elementary school picture, and the second is, we know he's going to get arrested, so it's not a spoiler. The second picture is him at the time that he was apprehended.
Okay, so in his first picture, Satoshi here is a young student. He's got a sort of almost Jackie Chan-like haircut. It's quite uniform, which is what you'd expect in a Japanese school. They have to select from a series of haircuts that they're allowed to have. And he appears to be wearing some kind of uniform. It's also a class picture, although everyone else's faces are obscured. And the second picture, which looks like it may be not necessarily an arrest photo, but a photo of him being escorted somewhere by police, I'm assuming. He looks kind of normal, to be honest. There's nothing. He's not got a tattoo across his face or anything like that. He just looks like your average 40-something Japanese man who's had a few too many Sapporo beers.
So Futoshi often had people over at his parents' house, predominantly, but not always female, and his parents rarely interfered in the gatherings and parties that he would have in his room of the family home. He was eventually transferred to another school when it was discovered that he was in a romantic relationship with a junior high student. Nevertheless, Futoshi was popular with the female students at the new high school that he transferred to. He was considered handsome and a bit of a bad boy by reputation. He played on this and began threatening the other students with his made-up stories of having ties to local gangs and mafias to intimidate the other kids. So not only manipulative, but very comfortable to lie and threaten others for his own gain.
Yeah. To put a little bit of context on that, I mean, at least for the British people out there, because Japan more or less follows the American system of elementary school, junior high school. So high school is from 16 to 18, and junior high school, I didn't work at a junior high school, but I think it's 12 to 15. So presumably he was dating one of the elder students in the junior high school.
So the older Futoshi got, the more dangerous traits he began to demonstrate, including a lack of empathy for others, manipulative qualities, and a selfishness that aided his determination to get whatever he wanted, whatever it took. He also became something of a womanizer, charming women into believing that they were in love with him, often having several women under his spell at any one time. Despite his womanizing ways, he married around the age of 19 or 20 to a woman 2 years his senior who goes under the pseudonym Kanji in most stories. They had a child together around a year later. He reportedly had an additional 10 girlfriends throughout his marriage.
Yeah, I mean, again, that can happen anywhere. It's not unusual for...
That could happen anywhere.
No, I was going to
get married, you have 10 girlfriends on the side. I can't even find 10.
No, I was going to say, it's not unusual for people to get married younger in Japan. It tends to be more skewed on the younger side, in my own first-hand witnessing. But that tends to be the opposite of what happened in Satoshi's situation, where there's a child on the way, so whoop, right, time to get married, and then there you go from there. And also, infidelity in Japan, massively sweeping statement, but it's a bit different to how it is here, in so much as it...
Really?
Yeah, I mean, traditionally, this is a very old way of thinking, but I have heard that...
Careful.
I've read a lot of books about Japan and about a lot of different subcultures and things like that. And there used to be a way of looking at a marriage as in, if my husband goes to a prostitute, or if he goes to see a woman for some kind of sexual service, that's okay, because he's going to a professional for it. But if he was to cheat on me with one of his co-workers, that would be grounds for divorce.
Well, that's a novel way of looking at it, I suppose.
I mean, that's not... I wouldn't say that's very common thinking with people now, but certainly of a certain generation. This sounds different with Satoshi, though, because he's saying he had girlfriends.
Yeah.
So that implies to me that he's not paying them,
No.
that they are with him because they want to be with him.
Quite the opposite of paying them, let's say that, as we continue on here, Chris. So his wife would eventually leave him, fleeing their apartment and Futoshi's domestic violence. She ended up in a shelter for women, as she was too scared to go to her family home, for fear that Futoshi would find her and hurt her family if she stayed there. It seems that Kanji was well aware of the extent of Futoshi's control and manipulation, which we will get to know in detail as this story progresses, Chris. So one of Futoshi's many girlfriends was a former classmate turned kindergarten teacher named Junko Ogata. The two had attended the same school, but they didn't really know each other. It was only after a school reunion that they became acquainted. So Junko and Futoshi became romantically involved in the autumn of 1982. She was particularly susceptible to Futoshi's manipulation, obeying his orders without resistance. She came from a wealthy family who owned land and property, and it's believed that Futoshi was her first serious romantic relationship. The pair would meet up at love hotels to continue their affair in secret. They began meeting up more often as time went on, and he told Junko that he had no feelings of love for his wife and implied that he wanted to marry her once he got a divorce. So Junko confided in a relative that she was having an affair with Futoshi, and her family did an investigation into him. And this kind of exposed the affair, leading to the breakdown of Futoshi's actual marriage. A lot to unpack there, Chris, but from what you were saying, this is a taboo no matter what generation you come from.
Yeah, definitely. It's difficult to make sweeping generalizations about any era or any group of people. You're going to find people on both ends of the spectrum, but the closer we get to the present day, the less accepted this is. And if, as you say, if she's coming from a wealthy family would want to vet whoever would be marrying into the family regardless.
Yeah.
It's a bit like the royal family in that regard. But in Japan, traditionally, whoever was marrying upwards would take the name of the other person. So it was entirely normal for a Japanese man to take the name of the Japanese woman if he was marrying up in society.
Futoshi blamed Junko for ruining his life, and to punish her, he violently assaulted her in a hotel, kicking her, punching her, hitting her with a phone book, and swinging her around by her hair. Before the pair checked out of the hotel, Junko was made to collect the hair that Futoshi had ripped from her scalp from the hotel room floor, and she flushed it away in the bathroom. She was also deprived of sleep around this time, getting no more than 2 to 3 hours of sleep per night. So let's take a look at Junko Ogata, Chris.
Okay, so again, having a look at Junko Ogata here, she looks, again, kind of normal. She isn't very happy in this picture whatsoever, so presumably this was taken after whatever's about to happen has been exposed. Yeah. But she looks probably in her late 30s, early 40s here. She's got long black hair, maybe some brown dye in there as well, and she's just kind of average, really. There's nothing too much that stands out about her.
So those who knew Junko before she came involved with Futoshi described her as bright, happy, polite, and reliable. She was always on time for work and she loved children, but her pleasant personality quickly degraded after becoming entwined with her manipulative former classmate, and she soon was neglecting her responsibilities, failing to show up for work, and became withdrawn and emotionless. Futoshi tattooed his name on Junko's right breast with Indian ink in a safety pin after accusing her of having affairs with other men. He also crudely tattooed the word fat on her thigh.
Well, he's just lovely, isn't he? There's so much more to that as well. I mean, firstly, what kind of a hypocrite is he? This guy's got, up to 10 women on the go at the same time, and he's worried about her cheating on him, although that's absolutely characteristic.
That's classic, isn't it?
Something like that.
Yeah, it's classic.
And next, he tattoos his name on her breast, which is tantamount to Woody having Andy's name written on his boot. It's like, I own you.
Yeah, it's ownership.
Yeah. And he tattoos the word fat, which I presume the word buta, which means pig or fat, on her thigh. But there's so much more to that as well, because it restricts what she can and can't do, because, especially in the 80s, tattoos were not commonplace in Japan, and if you had a tattoo, you were more likely than not a yakuza and a gangster, and you were prevented from entering most onsen. You would go to publicly wash yourself, which is part of Japanese culture. Of course, they had their own, baths and showers in their own home, but onsen is a huge part of culture, and that's depriving her of being able to go to that 9 times out of 10.
Exactly. And also, I think it would be quite embarrassing to get undressed in front of another man and actually, have them look at that on you and have to explain that. Like, he really thought about this, like, how to control her.
I mean, that's one way of keeping her in that relationship. I don't want to have to deal with this again, have to explain where this tattoo came from. Yeah, and from the pictures that I've just seen of her there, the one thing that you would not describe her as is fat.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, like, he would go on to restrict her sleep, her food, everything like that. So she became severely underweight as time went on. Junko endured Futoshi's ill treatment, believing one day that he would be married against the will of Junko's mother, Shizumi, who hated Futoshi and did not make an effort to hide that fact from her daughter. Shizumi knew that Futoshi was abusing her daughter and stated that she would never approve of a marriage between them, nor give her her blessing. Futoshi saw Shizumi as an obstacle, and a bit of a trigger warning here. One night in 1985, he gained access to the Ogata family home and raped her. Some reports state that he seduced Shizumi and had her take part in what has been described in some reports of the story as a quote-unquote simulated rape, like some twisted form of roleplay, as some say they actually had an affair, but I can't confirm which it was. Either way, this was a disturbing event.
I mean, I can't and don't want to really comment on any of that, but it doesn't sound, if she hated his guts, it doesn't really sound like that would be something that anybody would willfully partake in. Yeah,
so I have read both, but either way, horrific if he, broke into the family home and raped his girlfriend's mother. And if it was some kind of consensual role play thing, also awful. So either way, very disturbing situation, and he's really getting his claws into everything that Junko cares about and needs in her life. That is anything that's an obstacle. He's just destroying it. So he chips away at Junko's morale, and he convinces her that her entire family hated her following a suicide attempt that she had in February of 1985. Junko had taken a handful of her grandfather's sleeping pills and cut her wrist following a depressive episode. She was transported to hospital in time to survive. So after the attempt to take her own life, Futoshi saw an opportunity to further isolate her from her family by having her move out of the family home and into his apartment. Futoshi further lied to her, telling her that he had split from his wife to be with her and that they no longer had to hide the fact that they were in a relationship together. So no more love hotels, no more acting, no more hiding, which, his marriage had already been exposed by the investigation that her family did into them. So not much of a noble sacrifice in Junko's name there. But Junko did quit her job at the kindergarten in February of 1985. She also cut ties with her family around this time. She was moved into an apartment with an employee of Futoshi's futon business. This guy acted as a guarantor for the apartment, so she's moved away from her family and she's isolated. She can now no longer go and say to her mom, this happened and this happened. There's going to be no more investigations. He's got her alone. So he has her in this apartment for a little bit, but he decides that if he wants to continue beating her and abusing her, she probably needs to live with him, right? So he can hide it, and he can give her beatings in areas that would be seen publicly. Once he'd gotten Junko away from her family, he began to dish out even more beatings, the injuries of which he felt he no longer had to hide. He began striking Junko about the face and head, leaving behind obvious bruising. That same year, when he was 24 years old, he opened up his own antique store, 3 stories high, with a bunch of employees, called his business The World. Initially, he had started a futon company 2 years prior in the same building, but he had expanded out. So his family had a history of selling futons and, furniture and things like that. Futoshi's father had taken over Futoshi's grandfather's futon store in 1968, so this had been in the family for generations. By 1985, Futoshi was worth around $2.2 million.
Oh, that's...
Sounds impressive.
That's quite a lot for a little punk from school. Yeah, maybe no wonder he sort of had this kind of attitude. If he knew he was always going to be going into the family business and be potentially, minted, but that doesn't excuse this behavior.
No, and although it sounds impressive on paper, Futoshi had collected this money through a series of fraud and blackmail, and he had also scammed the Yakuza and other shady figures from the underworld. He often had to hide from those people because they were constantly coming to find him at his workplace.
Oh, right.
So he was quote unquote worth around $2.2 million, of which he had just got from his terrible ways.
Fukuoka is one of the central bases for the Yakuza, along with, I think it's Osaka and Tokyo. I think they're the major three where they are. And I'm sure probably everybody's listening has heard of the Yakuza. They need no introduction. But for a quick analogy, they are the Japanese mafia. You do not want to mess with them.
No, and that'll come into play again in the story a bit later on. Not only cruel to the women in his life, Futoshi began torturing his employees by shocking them with a stun gun while they were working for his own amusement. He would reportedly creep up behind his workers and shock them with electricity, exclaiming that a ghost was draining them of their luck.
Where the fuck do you get a stun gun from?
It's Futoshi. Where does he get anything from, including his ideas?
Gotcha.
So, when I say Futoshi went up behind his workers and shocked them, Chris, I'm not talking like a Smithy's electric shock chewing gum. I'm talking this.
Ow. That is, yeah, that is not just a quick zap. That is a full-on contact burn. That looks like an arm, and it's the elbow that you can sort of see with the bicep, and there's a good 2-inch scar that seems to wrap around the bottom of the elbow, and that is, that he's not just zapped them; he's zapped them with a big voltage, and he's held it there for a while as well.
Yeah, and the skin looks borderline melted. It's horrible. So he would force his workers to recruit other workers, and he wouldn't allow them to leave. They slept in a room together in the building that the World Company was in, and he had them torture each other for mistakes or incomplete tasks. So Chris, we have a description of what went on there from one of the workers.
90% of the electric shocks were done in the room where we stayed. But I was beaten not only on my hands and feet, but also on my forehead and private areas. As soon as the electric current is applied, the legs and feet feel stiff, and eventually the heated cords dig into the skin like an electric heating wire, causing burns and sores. I can't put into words anymore. It was more shocking and painful than when I was kicked. Not only Matsunaga, but other employees who did it were grinning and happy. So it sounds like an almost cult-like environment. It's a pack mentality, isn't it? It's, everyone's fun to jump in as long as it's not them.
Futoshi deprived his workers of both food and sleep, and Junko was no exception to the rule. She sustained beatings that left her with bruises and abrasions to the face, swollen and bruised limbs, a ruptured pancreas, malnutrition, and severe weight loss. Her voice was also hoarse and strained after receiving karate chops to the throat.
This guy just keeps getting better, doesn't he? He's awful.
He's horrific.
I suppose maybe a question that some people might have at this point, maybe not necessarily about Junko, because clearly there's sort of abuse going on here and there's controlling methods. But why didn't the employees just leave? But it might not have been that easy. I mean, in Japan, loyalty to the company is everything, and people tend to keep jobs for life. And I imagine that he probably wasn't hiring people who would easily resist him either.
Exactly.
I imagine he's probably hiring people who he felt like he could manipulate. There's a lot of unique elements, I think, in the weeds of things here that are keeping people in this situation that are quite uniquely Japanese. But one thing that isn't uniquely Japanese is the fact that people exert control over other people and abuse that control. And that's how people can find themselves in these horrible situations.
Yeah, and if we recall his school days, he'd often lie about, I'm part of the Yakuza. He could probably be doing that with his workers too.
Yeah.
We don't know. Junko was so brainwashed that she believed she was deserving of these injuries and the abuse because she was in the wrong or at fault. He moved her into the company building where she lived on one of the upper floors. Now, Futoshi Matsunaga's technique for extorting money from his many mistresses was to force them to sign contracts for futons at his business under fake names, and these futons would be priced extortionately and leave employees in debt and bankrupt. So he's frauding for loans, frauding for payment. So he would also take money from their wages, At least one of the women committed suicide from the pressure of the situation in the early 90s. So this is how horrific his impact was on the lives of women, employees, anyone who crossed his path.
I mean, yeah, that's just... It sounds like he's just a sort of 360-degree abuser, to be honest. He's getting every aspect of it. You know, he's making you live at your workplace. He's making your co-workers abuse you. He's making people believe they deserve it. He's controlling your money. He's doing all of the classic things that abusers do, but he's doing it to an extreme level, which is, you know, becoming like a cult as well. I bet you that some of the employees were hoping to be the favored employee and hoping to be kind of his number two and things.
And you're right when you said it was cult-like.
Well, yeah.
So these women that he was having affairs with and frauding for money, and all the other employees at the company, believed that Junko Ogata was Futoshi Matsunaga's sister. He was always lying about his relationship with her so he could string along other women. Junko was in charge of the accounting at the business and other clerical work. And I did read somewhere that she went out getting loans for the company and forced other employees to take out loans too.
Yikes.
So she took out large loans to fund the company, as well as begging her wealthy family to purchase contracts for the overpriced futons and accessories. And everyone who got involved with the World Company ended up in severe debt or bankrupt or worse. Futoshi's crimes would not go unnoticed by the Japanese authorities, and by the early 90s, both he and Junko, who was considered an accomplice at this point, found themselves on Japan's most wanted list. They moved around often to evade the Yakuza and underworld figures that they owed money to, and damned the lives of those unlucky enough to become acquainted with them along the way. Imagine meeting this kind of character by chance. By the spring of April 1993, Futoshi was living in an apartment with Junko in Kitakyūshū. He continued passing off Junko as his sister and met a married woman with 3 children whose life would be devastated after she became entangled in Futoshi's web of lies and manipulation. This woman was soon convinced to separate from her husband and ran off with Futoshi, with Junko in tow. By September of 1993, one of her children had died, and the remaining 2 were taken away from her and sent to live with their grandparents. She lost almost $150,000 to Futoshi. Just shy of 1 year later, she also lost her life.
So, this guy just leaves a path of destruction everywhere he goes.
Gets worse. It gets worse, Chris.
Oh.
Yep. Although it was clear these misfortunes had befallen the woman after becoming involved with Futoshi, the mysterious circumstances of both her and her child's death could not be connected to Futoshi by police, and he subsequently got away with it.
One thing that I know about the Japanese police is that they've got an incredibly high conviction rate, so 99%. That is only because they will only press charges when they are absolutely sure the person that they are pressing the charges against is the person who committed the crime. So if they didn't have the evidence needed to get a conviction, they won't have pursued Satoshi for this. It's like with beyond a shadow of a doubt that you've committed this crime.
Next to fall victim to Futoshi's abuse was a man named Kumio Toraya and his daughter. Kumio was a young father in his early 30s at the time, and he met Futoshi while out drinking. What happens to Kumio is horrible. So Futoshi had discovered information pertaining to Kumio's criminal history and was using this information to blackmail him. Futoshi was the only one who knew Kumio's secret, as well as the fact that he had some shady characters from the underworld looking for him. Futoshi threatened to expose him if he didn't let him move into his apartment, which he shared with his young daughter. Against his will, Kumio accepted and opened the door to a world of torture and abuse that would result in his death. Kumio was tied up with rope and kept that way while he suffered unrelenting abuse. His daughter was forced to hit him, bite him, shock him, and feed him his own feces. This torture happened around the clock for 2 years, and neither the father nor daughter left the apartment during this time. In the winter, he would be locked in the coldest room in the apartment and drenched with ice-cold water thrown over him by Junko at Futoshi's command. If Kumio's daughter resisted administering the abuse, she would be shocked, electrocuted like the employees, or hurt. It's likely that, as per Futoshi's pattern of abuse, that she was also deprived of both sleep and food. So these techniques, as you probably noticed, aren't exactly soft forms of torture, Chris, and the CIA is reportedly known to use similar methods to extract information. So being doused in ice-cold water, which can lead to hypothermia, being deprived of food and sleep can impact a person's ability to, decision make. It can physically weaken them. It can induce hallucinations and psychosis, among other things. And militaries the world over have used these forms of torture to weaken a prisoner, and the methods go back centuries. And Futoshi knew this, and he applied them. God, did he apply them. So have you noticed anything at this point, Chris?
I've noticed that he's a dick.
But he also, Chris, he hasn't killed anyone with his own hand.
Okay, so he is, so one employee's killed herself.
Mm-hmm.
And then the child died as well, but we don't know what that circumstances were. But it seems like he likes to manipulate people to the edge of their sanity, to the point where he could get them to do almost anything.
Exactly. This case has been compared to the Manson case because Charlie Manson never actually killed anyone by his own hand, but he did manipulate people to kill. So this case often gets compared to that, and we can see why. So Kumio died after 2 years in early 1996. His daughter was convinced to believe that she had killed him. Not yet satisfied with his own sickening actions, Futoshi told Kuomi's daughter that she would be the one that had to dispose of her father's remains. They dragged Kuomi's body to the kitchen, where they dismembered him with an electric saw and boiled his mutilated remains in a large pan on the stove. Futoshi then forced the girl to consume the broth.
Oh, fucking hell. That's rank.
How would you come back from that?
Once you got somebody to do that, that would be pretty much, that's it, they're put in your hands, pretty much. You could convince them to do...
And this was a child, too.
Anything.
This is...
Yeah, how old was she?
She wasn't yet a teen, I don't think.
Oh, Christ.
Yeah, and if she was a very young teen. So, as you can imagine, it was a noisy process, grinding up remains in a blender and using an electric saw to cut up an entire body. And the stench of death and decay did not go unnoticed by those living in the building. Remember, this is an apartment. However, the neighbours did their best to ignore the goings-on that day, and no reports were ever received by police. That night, Kuomi's daughter, along with Junko, were ordered to crush up what was left of Kuomi and take the remnants on a ferry, where they disposed of them by throwing them overboard into the sea.
Right.
What a lovely evening.
So again, he's not playing any part in this part of the crime either.
Yeah, you can see he's really not getting his hands dirty. So it wasn't long before Futoshi found another victim to defraud and torture, continuing to wreck the lives of anyone connected to Kuomi. He found his next victim in the form of one of Kuomi's female friends. He lied to this woman about his life and achievements, claiming to have graduated from the University of Kyoto, which was untrue, and telling the woman that he would marry her. This time around, Futoshi's grasp begins to get a little bit slippery. So he rinsed this woman of almost $70,000 and he kept her captive in his apartment. But unlike Futoshi's previous victims, she escaped. The woman threw herself from a second-floor window in the spring of 1997 and was admitted to a psychiatric hospital as a result. The woman's daughter was later set free. Junko escaped Futoshi's clutches just a few weeks later, so she saw a victim escape and she was like, I'm going to go for it. So she told Futoshi that she was going out to work and she never returned to the apartment. Furious that she had escaped his control and that he no longer had an accomplice to do his bidding, he came up with a little plan to get her back. Futoshi began harassing Junko's family again, specifically targeting Junko's mother, Shizumi, who he had raped years earlier, and began taunting her and blackmailing her. In a last-ditch attempt to get Junko back in his control, he pretended to commit suicide and spread false information about his funeral. Believing that she was free from Futoshi forever, Junko returned to the apartment only to find him there alive.
So now he's faking his own death to...
Imagine.
Jesus.
She was brutally abused for fleeing, and her return spelled disaster for the entire family. So Chris, this story is already barbaric, but this is where it escalates to a whole new level.
Any specific trigger warnings people should be aware of?
Sexual abuse, torture.
Okay, go for it.
So Futoshi raped Junko's younger sister, Reiko, who was married to a man named Kazuya. The couple had children together, 10-year-old Aya and 5-year-old Yuki. Some reports state that Reiko was sexually abused by Futoshi every single day of her captivity and became something of a sex slave to him. So the family gave over $777,000 and systematically murdered one another at Futoshi's command. Futoshi never actually killed anyone by his own hand, rather determined which family member would kill whom, and he made it happen. 4 days before Christmas of 1997, Futoshi had Junko kill her pensioner father, Takashige, by shocking him to death. Junko's mother, Shizumi, could not psychologically handle what was happening, and in response, Futoshi ordered Reiko and her husband, Kazuya, to strangle the mother to death the following month, which they did. A few weeks later, he then had Aya, who was a child, hold down her mother, Reiko, while Kazuya strangled her to death with a wire. Kazuya was then imprisoned in the bathroom and eventually starved to death in April of 1998. He had been suffering from diarrhea and vomiting almost every day and was forced to eat his own feces. 10-year-old Aya, with the help of Junko, was commanded to murder her 5-year-old sibling Yuki, which she did. Kuomi's daughter was then ordered to kill Aya. Aya was tortured and electrocuted until she begged for death and met her fate in the summer of 1998. It was reported that Futoshi would have wires wrapped around the victim's nipples, genitals, face, feet, and other body parts, and he would have them shock each other mercilessly. The entire Ogata family had been coerced to torture and kill each other over the course of a year.
What the fuck? Like, yeah, that is like monstrous levels of fucked up. Like, how can someone have such a command over such a large amount of people, and especially a family unit as well, which you'd think would be the strongest kind of relationship, that you'd have, to convince someone to strangle their own mother or mother-in-law and, kill their geriatric father and things like this. And, fucking hell. It reminds me a little bit of, there's a movie, a Miki Takashi movie called Visitor Q.
That's the first thing that came to my mind too.
Yeah, for anybody who hasn't seen it, it's a trip. It's not about murder, but it is about a strange visitor who turns up at a family home and systematically seduces every single family member. Yeah, and that was released, I want to say, about 2001, maybe. So maybe it was partially inspired by this case, but yeah, this is like something from a movie. It doesn't seem like something that could actually happen in real life, but unfortunately. Yeah,
it's so horrific. Like, not that you want to, but like you can't imagine doing something like. I know that there's a lot of true crime stories. I mean, I write for Generation Y. I blog for them every Tuesday, so I've written my fair share of true crime, and a lot of that has been, unfortunately, about parents who, do horrific things to their kids and hide the body. And so horrific things do happen, but I have never heard a story like this, apart from, like you said, in like a Takashi Miike movie or something. Yeah. I can't fathom that this is actually real. This is why I had to share it with you, Chris. I was like, Actually, do you know where I actually got this idea for the episode?
No?
Your wife.
Oh. Oh.
I opened my notes folder and I saw this name, a Japanese name, and I was like, oh, that's from a very long time ago. I wonder why I've saved that in my notes. I don't even know who that is. So I Googled it thinking maybe it's a designer or maybe it's, like an artist or something. No, horrific crime case. And I was like, oh yeah, Chris's wife told me about that.
My lovely wife giving you tales of horrific serialized abuse. Thanks, darling.
The Japanese media didn't print every detail. They didn't really want to focus on it too much in the newspapers and everything. So we might not even be telling the half of what happened. This is just enough of what happened. So the bodies of the victims were disposed of in the same way Kuomi's body had been disposed of. Decapitated, boiled in pots before smashing up the bones and other matter that remained, and either dumping it in the sea or flushing it away in a washroom. Chris, let's take a look at the Ogata family here just to give a face to the victims.
So if you imagine sort of Junko at the centre of this picture, right next to her, you've got Satoshi, obviously. They were 43 and 42, respectively. And then you had Junko's mother and father, 58, 61, respectively. And then just branching off from Junko, you've got her sister and her husband, who were 33 and 38, respectively. And they had a pair of children, Aya, the young girl, who was 10, and Yuki, the boy, who was 5. And they all look like very upstanding individuals. I imagine anybody who knew them would find this as quite a shock that they had all been convinced to murder one another. And I think the fact that Satoshi managed to do this when the mother was so virulently hateful of him and also had been sexually assaulted by him in the past is, he must have been bordering on a cult of personality.
Futoshi, Junko, and their 2 children were the only ones left in the Ogata home alive. And Futoshi would go on to blame Junko for the deaths of their victims in 2002 when the couple were arrested after Kuomi's daughter, who was only 17 years old by that point, managed to escape after a failed first attempt and go to the police. Can you imagine being the officer that's hearing this story?
Yeah, you'd be in for quite a long day at the office.
Yeah, imagine a teenage girl coming to you and telling you this. And she still thinks she's killed her own father at this point. So imagine psychologically what that would do.
Did her information spark the police to do something?
Yep, so Junko maintained her silence for several months after she was arrested, before finally confessing and admitting that she deserved a death sentence for her involvement in the brutal crimes. She later told a reporter that in comparison to life with Futoshi, prison was heaven, and that she was happy she could sleep and eat on time, shower every day, and have time for reading. Junko actually preferred prison to life with Futoshi, which is not a surprise.
No, it's quite something. I imagine at this point it's jail versus prison because she won't have been convicted of anything yet, but still, I know that Japanese prisons, jails they're much more strict and regimented than they are over here, for example. They're certainly the absolute opposite of recreation units that you'd go to.
So we have a quote here from Junko after her arrest. If you could read it to the listeners there, Chris.
I felt as if I didn't exist at that time. I couldn't judge right from wrong, and I could only act according to Matsunaga's personal likes and dislikes. And to carry out his orders, Ogata Junko also said, all I could think about was how to escape this electricity, constant tension that made me want to turn myself into a stone. My thinking ability weakened, and I couldn't think about anything. It was very difficult to recover later. Wow. The idea of there being constant electricity in the air and you kind of turn into a stone, it kind of shows the psychological state that he had these people in, walking on eggshells all the time and just essentially hoping that you'd just perish versus have to continue another day in this horrible environment.
Yeah, and she couldn't actually admit to what she'd done for several months. Like, imagine finally getting away from Futoshi and just being with the thoughts in your own head. Like, looking back on everything you've done to all of these people and being like, I did that, I deserve to die. Like, So Futoshi had lured in one final woman before he was arrested. A mother of twins whom he had convinced to give over her children to him and Junko, along with $245,000 to, according to them, raise the children. The twins, along with Futoshi and Junko's own 2 children, were taken from them at the time of arrest. When the news of the arrest hit the headlines, former victims of Futoshi were shocked to see that he was actually alive. They thought he had likely been killed by the Yakuza for screwing people over. Apparently, Yakuza members would often come into the World Company HQ looking for him, and he would leave out the back and speed off in his car every time. According to a report, an investigation insider said of the case,
Matsunaga's hideous sexual proclivities were horrifying. Matsunaga forced his common-law wife's mother to take part in a simulated rape, and he used a stun gun on the genitals of Ogata's niece, who was only a little 10-year-old girl, giving her an electric shock. When we raided Matsunaga's home, we found loads of pornographic photos and videos that he'd taken. There were even photos where Matsunaga had taken pictures of naked women walking around with vibrators still inserted into themselves.
So as I said, a lot was left out of most of the reports about this case because it seemed like the Japanese media just did not want to publish these horrific details. It's probably a lot worse than what we've covered in this case today, Chris.
Yeah, it sounds awful.
So just to wrap it up here, between 2002 to 2003, Futoshi and Junko were charged with the murders of members of the Ogata family. Police did not have any evidence, so they relied on court testimonies provided to them from Kuomi's then teenage daughter, who was not charged with any crime, and the couple's children. Junko also admitted to a role in the murders, although Futoshi denied any part and attempted to blame it all on the women who he said were lying about his involvement.
Of course.
In late 2005, Futoshi and Junko were sentenced to death by hanging. Both appealed the decision, and in 2007, Junko's sentence was changed to life imprisonment. However, Futoshi Matsunaga's death sentence remained. So there you have it, Chris. On a final note, there is a movie apparently based on this case. It's on Netflix. I think it's called The Forest of Love, is it?
Yes.
Chris, I want you to watch this trailer, and I want you to tell me if you think this trailer in any way reminds you of the case that we have just discussed.
Okay, I'll have a look. It is directed by Sion Sono, who you may know for the movie Love Exposure, and he's got a very, very specific style to him, so it wouldn't surprise me if it was quite out there.
But is it anything like the case, Chris?
Let's have a look. Okay, so apart from having some of the worst dubbing that I've seen in a modern era, that is very, very loosely based on events. Yeah, I must have missed a bit where you said Futoshi was a singer-songwriter.
There's a bunch of punks in it. Why?
Why not?
Well, I'll definitely be watching that, Chris.
Yes.
And I hope you will too.
I'll check it out. It's on Netflix, apparently, presumably worldwide, so check it out. Let us know what you think about it. The director's got a good pedigree to him, so it'll definitely be a visually interesting movie to watch.
Yeah. But that's all for today, Chris. Less laughs than usual.
Yeah.
But you guys wanted true crime, so here it is.
Yeah, thank you for choosing a nice light-hearted story to open up 2023 with. But
please thank your wife.
But it was certainly a shocking tale here. I mean, quite a lot of the time on DSR we do deal in the extremes of things, but this is extreme in a way that I think makes everybody uncomfortable. The idea of being able to infiltrate a family over a long term and convince them to kill each other, and also to just repeatedly convince women to give up everything they love and all of their money and everything else.
Yeah, but we can be thankful that we know where he is and he's behind bars, and his day is going to come, And the world is safer now that he's been caught and he's locked in a box.
Well, thank you, Linz, very much for sharing that delightful story, which is just the type of light listening that I wanted to hear at 20 to midnight on a Wednesday evening. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Chris. Well, if it cheers you up anymore, I'm sitting here with the 1996 launch issue of UFO Reality magazine.
Oh.
And in here, Chris, this will definitely cheer you up, I'm sure. In here we have a picture from a UFO sighting. A UFO sighting after it happened.
I seen it. It was over there.
Without the UFO in the picture. So
I mean, that is quite the hard evidence right there.
Yeah, we have a picture of it just so you can imagine what it may have looked like in the sky.
My next episode's coming up in a fortnight's time, while I'll be regaling Linz with a very interesting investigation to something that we might think we know, but do we really? So join us then for a somewhat of a potential expose into the night sky. We'll look at all things then. But until this time, people can check out the pictures, that you want to see. We won't be posting anything awful on the Instagram. And you can find that over on our Instagram at d.s.radio. And also, as well, Patreon, which is patreon.com/dystopian simulation radio. And don't forget our speak pipe, which you can find in the description of our Instagram bio, the link there, the link tree. You can find our speak pipe. You can leave us a message. So if you want to tell us a spooky story, if you want to tell us about something weird that's happened to you, have you had an experience with an extraterrestrial? Have you ever seen a ghost? Do you simply have something that you want to tell us? We will use them for an upcoming episode. So do make sure whatever you send us, you want to be played out on air. And if there's any specific things that you want, like to be called by a code name, we'd like code names. They're fun, or something like that. If you don't want to be exposed or doxxed, then just let us know. But apart from that, we will see you next time.
Yes, thank you for listening, everybody. Happy New Year, and bye for now. Bye.
Bye.